January 26, 1945, 2:20 p.m. The frozen fields outside Holtzwihr, France. Through the smoke and chaos of battle, something impossible was happening. A single American soldier at the top of a burning tank destroyer was systematically destroying an entire German company's advance. The elite mountain troops of the 2nd Gebirgsjäger Division, veterans transferred from Norway specifically for this offensive, were being stopped cold by what appeared to be a boy who couldn't weigh more than 50 kilograms. Behind the German lines, 6 tanks, Panzer IVs and tank destroyers that had crushed resistance across Europe, sat immobilized, their commanders too shocked to advance without infantry support that was being methodically cut down by a single American. The 250 men of the reinforced German company had walked into what Wehrmacht tactical doctrine said was impossible. One soldier holding a position against an entire combined arms assault. The mathematics was stark. 40 exhausted Americans against 250 elite German mountain infantry and 6 tanks. By every principle of military science, the American position should have been overrun in minutes. Instead, for one impossible hour, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy would rewrite the rules of warfare. The path to that burning tank destroyer began in the cotton fields of Hunt County, Texas. Audie Murphy was born on June 20, 1925, to impoverished sharecroppers Josie Bell and Emmett Berry Murphy. The 6th of 12 children, Murphy's childhood was defined by crushing poverty and a responsibility that fell on his shoulders far too soon. His father abandoned the family when Audie was just 12, leaving them to fend for themselves in the depths of the Great Depression. The family scratched out a living picking cotton, a brutal, back-breaking labour for pennies a pound. The Murphy children were malnourished, their clothes patched and repatched until the original fabric was a distant memory. In 1941, the Great Depression was compounded by personal tragedy. His mother, Josie Bell, died of endocarditis and pneumonia, leaving the 16-year-old Audie as the primary provider for his younger siblings. The weight of the world was on his slight frame. It was during this time that he developed a skill that would later terrify an entire army. "If I don't hit what I shoot at, my family doesn't eat tonight," young Murphy had told his neighbour, Monroe Hackney, explaining his uncanny marksmanship. The boy could drop a running rabbit at 50 yards with a .22 rifle that most people couldn't hit a barn with. Each bullet cost precious money the family didn't have. Each miss meant empty stomachs. Under such constant life-or-death pressure, Murphy developed a shooter's eye and a cold, calculating focus that would later become legendary on the battlefields of 3 countries. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Murphy saw his chance. The military offered a steady paycheck, 3 meals a day, and the ability to send money home to support his starving siblings. But even joining proved difficult for the undersized teenager. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches and weighing 110 pounds, Murphy was rejected by both the Marines and the Navy as being too small. The newly formed Army paratroopers, who had strict physical requirements, wouldn't take him either. Finally, the regular US Army infantry accepted him on June 30, 1942, after his sister Corinne provided a falsified affidavit claiming he was 18, not the 16-year-old boy he actually was. Private First Class David Mouse McClure, who went through basic training with Murphy at Camp Walters, Texas, later recalled, "We all thought he was a mascot at first. This kid, who looked about 14 and weighed nothing. The drill sergeants rode him mercilessly, called him baby. But there was something about his eyes. When he was on the rifle range," McClure said, "those baby blue eyes went cold as winter. He never missed, not once." It was the same focus he had hunting rabbits in Texas, now honed and sharpened by military discipline. He wasn't just shooting at targets, he was ensuring his family's survival, even from a world away. Murphy's transformation from Texas farm boy to lethal soldier began during the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, landed at Licata as part of General George S. Patton's 7th Army. In the mountains of Sicily, Murphy discovered something that would both define and haunt him for the rest of his life. He was exceptionally, almost preternaturally, good at killing. His rural upbringing had taught him to move silently through the underbrush, to use terrain for concealment, to shoot quickly and accurately without hesitation. These were not skills taught in basic training, they were instincts forged by necessity. Near Palermo, when his unit was pinned down by withering machine gun fire, Private Murphy didn't wait for orders. He worked his way alone around the enemy position, crawling through gullies and scrub brush, eliminated the entire crew with hand grenades, and then turned their captured weapon on the retreating German forces. Captain Paul B. Harris, his company commander, recommended him for the Bronze Star, writing in his report, "This soldier displays a natural aptitude for combat that is extraordinary in one so young and inexperienced." It was the first official recognition of the deadly warrior that was emerging from the shy, poverty-stricken boy from Texas. The Italian campaign transformed Murphy from a good soldier into a legendary warrior. At the Volturno River crossing in October 1943, Murphy held off a determined German counterattack single-handedly when his squad was decimated by artillery fire. Using a borrowed sniper rifle, he killed 5 German soldiers at ranges exceeding 300 yards, a feat of marksmanship that stunned his comrades. For this action, he received the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valour. Staff Sergeant William Polson, who served with him, described Murphy's combat methodology. Murph didn't fight angry. That's what was terrifying about him. He fought cold, calculated, like he was doing arithmetic. See a German, eliminate the German, move to the next German. No emotion, no hesitation, just deadly efficiency. At Anzio, that blood-soaked beachhead which Winston Churchill called the Wildcat, Murphy earned his first Silver Star for destroying a German tank that was threatening to overrun his position. He crawled to within 15 yards of the armoured vehicle and fired a bazooka round into its side at point-blank range, disabling it and killing its crew. By the time of the invasion of southern France in August 1944, Operation Dragoon, Murphy had survived Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and the brutal fight for Rome. He had been wounded twice, decorated multiple times, and developed a reputation among both Americans and Germans as someone to be feared. During the drive through southern France, when his lieutenant was killed in an ambush near Montélimar, Sergeant Murphy took command of the platoon. Organising a hasty defence with only 18 men against a German company of over 100 soldiers, Murphy held a critical crossroads for 2 hours, personally accounting for 15 enemy dead. His leadership and courage under fire earned him a battlefield commission to second lieutenant on October 14, 1944. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a leader of men. By January 1945, as Company B of the 15th Infantry approached the Colmar Pocket, Murphy was no longer the baby-faced recruit who had joined in 1942. Combat had aged him beyond his 19 years. His face was etched with a hardness that belied his youth. He had seen most of his original companions from basic training killed or wounded. He had personally killed over 100 enemy soldiers, a number that he rarely spoke of, but that weighed heavily on his soul. The Colmar Pocket represented everything horrible about winter warfare, an 850-square-mile German bridgehead west of the Rhine River. It was the last piece of French soil still under Nazi control. Hitler had ordered it held at all costs, a thorn in the side of the Allied advance. The Germans had reinforced it with some of their best remaining units, including the battle-hardened 2nd Mountain Division, specially trained for winter combat in the brutal conditions of Norway and Finland. For Company B, the situation was beyond desperate. In 5 days of continuous fighting leading up to January 26th, they had lost 102 men wounded and all officers except Murphy, who were either killed or evacuated. From a full-strength company of 187 men, they were down to a mere 40 effectives. They were exhausted, cold, and running low on ammunition. Murphy himself was fighting with a painful leg wound from shrapnel received 2 days earlier, a fact he had told no one about, not wanting to further weaken the morale of his already shattered men. Private Anthony Abramsky, one of the 40, described their condition. "We were finished, done. Most of us hadn't slept in 3 days. We'd been living on cold K rations when we could eat at all. Half the guys had frostbite. Our machine guns were freezing up. We tried all night to dig foxholes, but the ground was like iron. When dawn came and we saw our positions strung out along the edge of the woods with open fields in front of us, we knew we were sitting ducks. They were a single frayed thread holding back a tidal wave, and the tide was about to come in. January 26, 1945, dawned grey and bitterly cold. The temperature hovered right at the freezing point, but a vicious wind whipping across the open fields drove the chill deep into the bone, cutting through the heaviest wool overcoats the American soldiers possessed. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, though constant artillery fire from both sides had churned much of the battlefield into a moonscape of frozen mud and treacherous ice. Company B held a tenuous line along the edge of the Bois de Redefind forest, looking out across nearly a mile of open, snow-covered ground toward the German-held village of Holtzwihr. The position was a death trap, and every man in the company knew it. Murphy had positioned his depleted company as best he could. He had 2 M10 tank destroyers as his only anti-tank capability, their 76mm guns the only weapons that could hope to defeat the German armour. His infantry was spread thin along the wood line, a scattered line of exhausted, frost-bitten men. He had established his command post in a shallow drainage ditch that offered some protection from small arms fire and a clear, unobstructed view of the killing ground in front of him. A single, fragile field telephone line connected him to the supporting artillery batteries miles to the rear. It was his lifeline, his only real hope of stopping a determined German assault. The German attack, when it came, was preceded by the familiar, terrifying drumbeat of an artillery barrage that began at precisely 1 p.m. It wasn't just any barrage. The Germans were using airburst shells fused to explode in the treetops above the American positions. The effect was devastating. There was no cover in the foxholes they'd managed to dig. Instead of the ground absorbing the blast, the trees exploded into thousands of wooden splinters and white-hot metal fragments that rained down on the men huddled below. The barrage lasted for a full 30 minutes, though to the men enduring it, each second felt like an eternity of screaming death. At 2 p.m., as the last shell screamed overhead and exploded, the German attack materialized out of the trees and smoke on the far side of the field. Private First Class Donald Ekman, peering through his binoculars, was the first to spot them. His voice, crackling with fear and awe, came over the company net. "You can see the pennants on the antenna of the German tanks," he reported. 6 of them, spread out in attack formation, and behind them, Jesus Christ, there must have been 250 infantry, all in white snow camouflage, moving across that field like ghosts. Murphy's first action was to grab the field telephone and call for artillery support. He began adjusting fire, walking the exploding shells closer to the advancing German formations. But artillery alone wouldn't stop this attack. The Germans were too spread out, too numerous, and moving too fast. They were using the classic combined arms tactic, with tanks leading and infantry following close behind, to neutralize any anti-tank positions. At 600 yards, the 2 M10 tank destroyers opened fire. Their first shots screamed across the field and kicked up plumes of snow and ice, missing their targets. The crews were exhausted, their hands numb from the cold, their senses dulled by days of continuous combat. The German response was immediate and devastating. An 88mm high-explosive shell from one of the Panzer IVs struck the rear M10 tank destroyer squarely in its turret. There was a deafening explosion as the armour plate, no more than an inch thick, was penetrated. The vehicle burst into an enormous fireball, its crew, if they were not killed instantly, scrambling out and running for the relative safety of the woods, their uniforms on fire. The forward M10, attempting to manoeuvre for a better firing position, slid sideways on the icy ground into the same drainage ditch where Murphy had his command post. Its tracks, unable to find purchase on the frozen earth, spun uselessly. It was a sitting duck. Seeing the fate of the other tank destroyer, its crew abandoned their vehicle and retreated, leaving Murphy's position completely devoid of anti-tank protection. It was approximately 2:20 p.m. With both tank destroyers out of action and German infantry closing to within 200 yards, the situation was hopeless. The American line was about to be completely overrun. It was at this moment of absolute crisis that Murphy made the decision that would etch his name into the annals of military history. He got on the company radio and gave his final, desperate order. His remaining men were to fall back to a secondary, prepared position deeper in the woods. It was a tactical retreat, an order to save the lives of what was left of his company. But he himself didn't retreat. Instead, as his men began pulling back, Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy, a 5'5", 110-pound officer with a shrapnel wound in his leg, did the unthinkable. He ran through the incoming artillery fire directly toward the burning M10 tank destroyer. The vehicle was fully engulfed in flames at the rear, where the 88mm shell had ignited its fuel and ammunition. Black, acrid smoke poured from the hull, and the heat was so intense it could be felt from 30 feet away. At any moment, the vehicle's remaining 75mm and .50 caliber ammunition could cook off, turning the entire hull into a massive bomb that would obliterate everything around it. Ignoring the danger, Murphy climbed onto the burning tank destroyer. He made his way to the front of the hull and manned the heavy .50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun mounted on a pedestal there. From this elevated position, he had a clear, commanding field of fire across the entire German approach route. But he was also completely, utterly exposed. He was a single figure, silhouetted against the sky and the raging fire behind him, with no cover except the smoke that billowed around him. Private First Class Anthony Abramski, watching from the relative safety of the woodline, later recounted the scene with disbelief. "I saw Lieutenant Murphy climb on top of the burning tank destroyer while bursts of machine gun fire were hitting all around him. Pistol fire from the advancing infantry battered against the hull and tread. It was the greatest display of guts and courage I have ever seen." The M2 Browning was, and is, arguably the finest heavy machine gun ever designed. It fired .50 BMG cartridges at a rate of 550 rounds per minute, with an effective range of over 2,000 yards. Its half-inch bullets could penetrate light armour and tear human bodies apart. In Murphy's hands, it became an instrument of precise, systematic destruction. He didn't spray and pray. He used short, controlled bursts, his cold shooter's eye finding targets in the snow and eliminating them one by one. For the next hour, Murphy operated the heavy machine gun with extraordinary effectiveness. Throughout the entire engagement, he maintained telephone contact with his supporting artillery battery, shouting adjustments over the roar of the fire and the thunder of the machine gun. He was calling in fire missions dangerously close to his own position, a practice known as danger close. The combination of his devastating machine gun fire and the accurate artillery he directed created a wall of steel that the German infantry simply could not penetrate. Sergeant Elmore Broilson, observing from the edge of the woods, testified, "The German infantrymen got within 10 yards of Lieutenant Murphy, who killed them in the ditches, in the meadows, in the woods, wherever he saw them." The German forces found themselves in an impossible tactical situation. Their tanks, expecting to simply roll over the weakened American position, discovered they could not advance without the infantry support that was being methodically shredded by the lone American on the burning tank. Wehrmacht tactical doctrine emphasized the importance of combined arms operations. Without infantry to protect them from close assault, the tanks were forced to halt and withdraw, rather than risk being isolated and destroyed. At approximately 3 p.m., after 40 minutes of continuous firing, a new problem emerged. Murphy's ammunition for the .50 caliber began to run low. The barrel of the machine gun was glowing red-hot from the sustained fire. The burning tank destroyer beneath him was starting to settle into the frozen ground as its rubber tires and metal tracks melted. To make matters worse, the German infantry, realizing he was their primary obstacle, were working their way forward. A group of them had managed to get within 10 yards of his position, using a ditch as cover. Private Charles Owen recalled, "We could hear the lieutenant's .50 starting to slow down. He was running out of ammo. Some of the Germans must have figured it out too, because they started rushing forward." Murphy grabbed his M1 carbine slung over his shoulder and started picking them off with that, but he knew it was only a matter of seconds. He was out of time and nearly out of options. At approximately 3:10 p.m., with his ammunition nearly exhausted and German infantry closing to within grenade-throwing range, Murphy made the most desperate call of the battle. He was back on the field telephone, his voice calm but urgent, speaking to the artillery forward observer, Lieutenant Walter Weisspfennig. He needed one more barrage, but the Germans were too close. There was only one place left for the shells to land. "I'm giving you a direct order," Murphy yelled over the din of battle. "Fire on my position, now!" On the other end of the line, Weisspfennig was horrified. He was looking at his map and knew exactly where Murphy was. A fire mission on that coordinate would mean certain death for the lieutenant. He initially refused, arguing that it was suicide, but Murphy was adamant. His men were behind him, and if this attack broke through, they would all be killed. He repeated the order, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Fire on my position!" The first shells from the 105mm howitzers screamed overhead and landed with terrifying accuracy, within 50 yards of the burning tank destroyer. The ground heaved, massive explosions threw frozen earth, snow and shrapnel in all directions. German infantry caught in the open were literally torn apart by the steel storm. But Murphy, exposed on top of the vehicle, was also in the impact zone. A piece of shrapnel, white hot from the explosion, tore through his leg, his second wound of the day. He barely flinched. He simply continued firing the few .50 caliber rounds he had left, aiming at the stunned and disoriented German soldiers. The combination of Murphy's direct, point-blank fire and the thunderous artillery barrage directly on top of them finally broke the German attack. It was one thing to advance against a lone soldier. It was another thing entirely to be simultaneously machine-gunned and shelled by what felt like an entire division. The surviving German infantry, perhaps 100 men from the original 250, began falling back in disarray toward Holtzwihr. The tanks, seeing their infantry support evaporate and facing increasingly accurate and dangerously close artillery fire, reversed their engines and withdrew. The attack had failed. At approximately 3:20 p.m., after a full hour of continuous solitary combat, Audie Murphy climbed down from the burning M10 tank destroyer. His uniform was scorched and blackened from the intense heat. Blood ran down his leg from the shrapnel wounds, staining the snow around him. Behind him, the tank destroyer continued to burn, a funeral pyre for the German attack. It finally exploded in a massive fireball 10 minutes after he abandoned it, a final, violent end to the vehicle that had served as his fortress. The battlefield before him was a scene of utter devastation. German bodies lay scattered across the snow-covered fields, twisted and broken. Military historians would later estimate that Murphy's one-man stand resulted in approximately 50 German dead, with many more wounded. The surviving Germans were in full, panicked retreat, their officers unable to rally them for another assault. Murphy walked back to the woodline where his men waited, their faces a mixture of awe, relief, and disbelief. According to Private Abramsky, he was unnervingly calm. Scary calm. He asked if we had any casualties from the artillery, made sure everyone was okay, then sat down and lit a cigarette like nothing had happened. His hands weren't even shaking. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the historical documentation of this incident is the near-complete absence of German first-hand accounts. Despite extensive research in German military archives, the Bundesarchiv, and veteran organizations, no specific German soldier quotes, diary entries, or post-war testimonies about Murphy's action at Holtzwihr have ever surfaced in accessible historical records. This silence is particularly notable given the engagement's intensity and the profound shock it must have caused among the attacking forces. Several factors explain this documentary gap. The German units involved suffered catastrophic casualties from Murphy's actions alone, likely eliminating many of the potential witnesses. Wehrmacht division-level records from this period, the final months of the war, were often destroyed in subsequent fighting or in the deliberate chaos of surrender. The rapid German withdrawal following the failed attack, described in American records as a disheartened retreat, suggests a demoralized force unlikely to document what they viewed as a humiliating and inexplicable tactical defeat. The German units have been identified through operational records. The 2nd Mountain Division provided the primary infantry force, supported by elements of the 708th Volksgrenadier Division and the 285th Assault Gun Battalion. These were not second-rate troops, they were elite formations. The mountain troops in particular were veterans with extensive combat experience on the Eastern Front, making their failure against a single defender all the more shocking to German tactical expectations. The 2nd Mountain Division's official war diary for January 26th notes only, "Attack on American positions near Holtzwihr repulsed with heavy casualties. Enemy resistance heavier than expected." This terse, bureaucratic entry belies the terror and confusion that must have been unfolding among the German ranks. Elite mountain troops who had fought in Norway, Finland, and Russia had never encountered anything like this. A single American soldier who seemed immune to fear, fatigue, and the basic human instinct for self-preservation. Post-war German military analysis, included in their 1965 study Verteidigung überlegener Kräfte, Defense Against Superior Forces, identified several factors that contributed to their defeat. Overconfidence based on numerical superiority, tactical inflexibility when the initial assault was stopped, and the catastrophic failure of combined arms coordination when tanks and infantry were separated. But these cold, clinical terms fail to capture the psychological reality. The German forces never attempted another attack on Company B's position. That night, under cover of darkness, they withdrew from the sector entirely. Elite mountain troops, who had been specifically brought from Norway for this offensive, soldiers who had never retreated in 4 years of war, withdrew without orders from their corps commander. The psychological impact of being stopped by a single American soldier was more devastating than the physical casualties. Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr had consequences that rippled far beyond the immediate tactical victory. The successful defence of the Bois de Redefind forest enabled the entire 3rd Infantry Division to maintain its hold on the critical terrain that dominated the approaches to Holtzwihr village. The German failure to break through meant the Colmar Pocket's days were numbered. Holtzwihr itself fell to the 30th Infantry Regiment the very next day, January 27, 1945. Within weeks, the entire German bridgehead west of the Rhine had been eliminated, removing over 50,000 German troops from the war and freeing up Allied forces for the final assault into Germany itself. The engagement demonstrated that even elite German formations could no longer overcome determined American resistance, regardless of their numerical superiority. General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny, commander of the French First Army, recognized the importance of the American stand. The defense of the Holtzwihr approaches by the American 3rd Division, particularly the extraordinary action of Lieutenant Murphy, broke the back of German resistance in Alsace. The tactical lessons from Murphy's stand, particularly the devastating effectiveness of combined artillery and automatic weapons in a defensive role, influenced American tactical doctrine for the remainder of the European campaign. French recognition came swiftly. The 3rd Infantry Division was granted the right to wear the French Croix de Guerre, and a memorial was later erected at the battle site, ensuring that French citizens would forever remember the young American who helped liberate their homeland. The official Medal of Honor citation, presented to Murphy by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on June 2, 1945, provides the military's formal recognition of his achievement. The citation's language, typically understated in military documents, struggles to capture the extraordinary nature of the action. It reads, in part, "He was alone and exposed to German fire from 3 sides, but his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their infantry attack to waver. For an hour, the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate 2nd Lieutenant Murphy, but he continued to hold his position." The award ceremony near Salzburg, Austria, brought together surviving members of the 3rd Infantry Division to witness their comrade receive the nation's highest military honour. But for Murphy, the true battle was only just beginning. The war in Europe was over, but the war within himself was about to rage. While the world celebrated Audie Murphy as America's most decorated soldier, the young Texan was fighting a different war, one against the demons that had followed him home from the battlefields of Europe. The man who had shown no fear atop a burning tank destroyer, facing down an entire army, was terrified of the darkness in his own mind. The courage that defined him in combat did not simply vanish. It transformed into a different kind of strength, a daily battle against an enemy he could not shoot. Murphy's post-war struggle with what was then called battle fatigue, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, makes his story not just one of battlefield heroism, but of profound, enduring human resilience. He suffered from chronic insomnia, plagued by recurring nightmares that transported him back to the frozen hell of Holtzwihr, the mountains of Italy, and the bloody beaches of Anzio. He experienced extreme hypervigilance, a state of constant alertness that led him to sleep with a loaded pistol under his pillow for years. He would often startle at sudden noises and patrol the perimeter of his home at night, checking locks and windows as if he were still securing a defensive position. Eventually, the confines of his own bedroom became too much. He moved to sleeping in his garage with the lights on, unable to tolerate the darkness that reminded him of night patrols and the horrors they held. "I remember the experience as if it were a nightmare," Murphy wrote about his combat experiences in his memoirs. "A demon seemed to have entered my body." This was not the language of a man boasting of his deeds, but of a soul deeply scarred by the unspeakable things he had seen and done. His first marriage to actress Wanda Hendricks, whom he met after the war, lasted only 16 months, largely destroyed by the violent episodes and emotional distance caused by his PTSD. Hendricks later described him as being two people. During the day, he could be charming, funny, and generous, but at night, he became someone else, a tormented soldier trapped in the past. "He'd patrol the house with a loaded gun," she said. "He'd sleep in the garage with the lights on because darkness reminded him of night patrols." The war for him was never truly over. Despite his own immense suffering, or perhaps because of it, Audie Murphy became an early and outspoken advocate for veterans struggling with combat-related psychological injuries. In 1966, at the height of the Vietnam War, he wrote a powerful and candid article for the Saturday Evening Post. "I can't remember when I didn't have nightmares," he wrote. "They became part of my life, like breathing. But I was lucky. I could afford doctors, medication, therapy. What about the veteran who can't? What about the thousands coming back from Vietnam with the same problems?" His willingness to speak publicly about his own struggles, to break the stigma surrounding mental health, was revolutionary for its time. It helped lead directly to legislation that created the Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio in 1973, 2 years after his death. The facility specializes in treating PTSD and other combat-related psychological injuries, a lasting monument to a soldier who continued to fight for his comrades long after the guns fell silent. His transition to a post-war career was as unlikely as his battlefield exploits. After being spotted in a photograph on the cover of Life magazine, he was invited to Hollywood. Though initially skeptical, he saw it as a way to make a living. He went on to star in 44 films, most of them westerns, becoming one of the biggest box office draws of the 1950s. His most significant film was the 1955 adaptation of his own 1949 autobiography, To Hell and Back. In it, he played himself, reliving his most traumatic experiences for the world to see. The film was a massive commercial success, and for decades was Universal's highest-grossing film. For Murphy, it was a form of exorcism, a way to confront his past, but it could never fully heal his wounds. On May 28, 1971, at the age of just 45, Audie Murphy's life came to a tragic end. He was a passenger on a private plane that flew into a storm near Roanoke, Virginia, and crashed into the side of a mountain. All 6 people on board were killed. The man who had survived so much on the ground was taken by the sky. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His grave is one of the most visited sites in the cemetery, a place of pilgrimage for veterans, tourists, and those who simply wish to pay their respects to a unique American hero. Audie Murphy's military record remains unmatched by any American soldier in history. He received every single combat decoration for valor the United States Army could award, some of them multiple times. His 33 decorations included the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars with V devices for valor, and 3 Purple Hearts. This was in addition to 5 decorations from France and Belgium, but Murphy's true legacy lies far beyond the impressive collection of medals and ribbons. His story has become deeply embedded in American military culture. The U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, uses his action at Holtzwihr as a primary case study in defensive operations, leadership under fire, and the integration of supporting arms. The Audie Murphy Club recognizes exceptional non-commissioned officers who demonstrate the leadership qualities, professionalism, and commitment to their soldiers that Murphy embodied. Master Sergeant Ronald Johnson, a past president of the club, explained the continuing relevance. Every generation of soldiers needs heroes, examples of what's possible when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances. Murphy shows our soldiers that you don't have to be 6 feet tall or come from a military family to be a warrior. You just have to care more about your buddies than yourself. Military professionals often debate whether Murphy's stand could be replicated in modern warfare. Technology has fundamentally changed the battlefield. Satellites, drones, and precision munitions have created a transparent battlefield where individual heroics can seem impossible. Yet recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq suggest otherwise. The actions of soldiers like Staff Sergeant David Bellavier's house-to-house fighting in Fallujah, or Sergeant First Class Paul Smith's machine gun stand in Baghdad, all echo Murphy's willingness to face impossible odds to protect his men. As General Stanley McChrystal, former commander of Joint Special Operations Command, has argued, technology changes war's character, but not its nature. War ultimately remains a contest of human wills. What Murphy demonstrated at Holtzwihr, the willingness of one person to say, no further, regardless of the odds, that is timeless. On January 26, 1945, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy proved that one determined individual could stop an army. His stand at Holtzwihr shattered German assumptions about the American soldier. These were not the soft, pampered boys of Nazi propaganda. They were the sons of farmers and factory workers, shaped by the depression and hardship, who could be as hard as any warrior in history when defending their friends. The silence in the German records about that day speaks volumes. It is the silence of confusion, of humiliation, of an inability to explain or understand what had just happened. We see in it the deepest form of defeat, not just tactical or physical, but psychological and moral. They had met someone who was simply better at war than they were, and that recognition broke something fundamental in their warrior identity. Today, the field outside Holtzwihr is peaceful farmland again. The scars of battle have healed, the shell craters have filled in, and the blood has been washed away by decades of rain. But on January 26th each year, a small ceremony is held at the memorial marking Murphy's stand. French citizens, American veterans, and occasionally elderly Germans gather to remember the day one American soldier proved that courage has no limits. Murphy's story reminds us that heroism isn't about being fearless. By his own admission, Audie Murphy was terrified. It is about acting despite that fear when others depend on you. It's about making a stand when retreat would be easier. It's about becoming, for one crucial moment, larger than yourself. In the end, that is why the Germans were so shocked when one American soldier held off 250 of their best troops for over an hour, alone. They had encountered something that military science couldn't explain, that tactical doctrine couldn't counter, and that overwhelming force couldn't overcome. The unconquerable human spirit, embodied in a 110-pound Texan who would rather die than let his friends be killed. His stand at Holtzwihr remains eternal testimony that one person, at the right place and at the right time, with the right motivation, can change everything. The boy who hunted rabbits to feed his family became the man who stopped an army to save his friends. In war, as in life, that transformation from the ordinary to the extraordinary remains the most shocking truth of all.